guys, I'm here today to review 6 books that I recently hauled, read, and now I'm going to review them. So I usually talk about 3 books in these videos, but I've been pretty rubbish lately with 1, reading, and 2, updating you guys on here because I've had a lot going on. So I thought that in order to sort of start afresh with my reading and with my channel, I would talk about 6 books that I've recently read and sort of not spend as much time talking about each of them. So I have 3 memoirs and 3 novels to chat about. I'm going to do the memoirs first. So one I think most of you will have heard of by now is Educated by Tara Westover. So I've heard loads of people talk about this one. It's really popular at the moment. It came out a few months ago. So this is Tara's memoir about growing up in a survivalist Mormon family in rural Idaho and how she manages to become educated. So her family, as I said, are survivalist Mormon. Her father believes in the end of days. But that isn't really what dictates her life. What dictates her life is that her father obviously has some rather severe mental health problems which trickle down into some of his sons, and her mother sort of goes along with whatever her father dictates. And so her childhood becomes increasingly controlled and sort of terrifying, really, as the book progresses. Now, the first half of the book is about her growing up as a young girl on this area of land that her family own, and they own sort of a scrapyard. They don't believe in formal education or medical intervention, so the children are supposedly educated at home but not really. They never have lessons or anything, and if anything happens to them, which happens a lot because of the sort of rather dangerous lifestyle they lead on this scrapyard, they do not go to the doctors or to A&E or anything, and there's quite a lot of rather life-threatening accidents that happen in this book. Now, I loved the first half. I thought it was beautifully written. I love novels about young girls coming of age, so of course I'm going to love a memoir about that. And I just think the way she writes is spectacular. The way she talks about the landscapes of Idaho, but also the way she describes her family, was just perfect. Now, the second half of the book is as she becomes around 16, I guess, and decides that she wants to sort of step away from her family a bit, and become educated and know more than she currently does. Now, I preferred the first half of the memoir, and that's just because I preferred hearing about her coming of age and her struggles with her family, and I found the second half of the memoir a lot more conflicted. And with all 3 of these memoirs, their strengths, but yet their weakness for me as a reader, was that they've been written still in the moment. So lots of memoirs that I hear about that I want to pick up have been written many years after the events that are being discussed in the memoir, which means the author's had time to sort of look back on what's happened to them and come to terms with it and really be able to tell you as the reader how they feel about it compared to how they felt about it then. Whereas particularly with this one, Tara is writing this memoir still in the grips of the turmoil she feels about becoming educated and how that has separated her from her family. And I guess for me, I wanted more like closure about how she felt, because it's really hard reading this and not wanting to talk to her and say, how do you feel like this about this family that have done this to you? But yet it's really understandable, because of course you're not her and you haven't lived in the mental headspace that she's lived with these people for all these years. So I'd really recommend this, but just do know that it is written from a moment of still being very much within a sort of mixed headspace, I guess. So there's that one. The next one I want to talk about, I've seen quite a few people mention as well, and that is Fairies by Therese Marie Malhot. Now, I'm going to struggle to talk about this memoir and the next one because they're both very experimental and quite stylised, and I don't tend to read books like that because I think sometimes I just feel like I've not understood as much as I should, and I think this is a memoir that could be read several times over. I think it's a memoir that could be studied. There's an awful lot to get from it, and I'm certainly not somebody who, with the lifestyle I have, is going to have picked up on everything that I should have done. So the author grew up in the Pacific Northwest on an Indian reservation, and this book is about, I guess, a lot of things, but in particular about her mental health and all the varying things throughout her life that have affected that. Now, initially some of these chapters were written as short stories, and then she decided to go back and take out some of the fictional elements, make them closer to her own life, and then add more chapters and pull them together as this book. And therefore it's a bit out of order. It's not a traditional memoir at all like Educated is, so it jumps around a lot. and there are some sections that feel much more like folklore than they do like they're actually about the author's life, which I enjoy. Now, I guess there's some parts of this memoir that the bits I enjoyed the most were when she talks about herself as a young girl. You know, that's something that you're going to hear about all three of these memoirs. What I enjoy the most is hearing about people growing up and their relationship with their parents when they're children. And whenever we got to a chapter that was focused on that, I really enjoyed it. Also, whenever there was a chapter about her mother and her relationship with her mother, and the sort of battle that she has with how she views her mother because of some of the things that happened to her when she was a child. I thought they were brilliant chapters. A lot of the other chapters are focused on her relationship with one particular man and how sort of ill that made her, and the battle she has with him about whether he loves, I guess, the sane version of her, and whether that's wrong or right of him to do that, and whether it's wrong or right of her to try and make herself more socially acceptable in terms of mental health. So I enjoyed all that, but I guess I struggled with it in the sense that I admire the author for not making any excuses about her feelings for this man. But I guess it's difficult to read about this man and her relationship with him without wanting to scream into the book, why are you doing this to yourself? Because it just sounds really unhealthy for both of you. So that's quite hard, but also it's very raw and honest, and I guess I respect her for putting it on the page, and you know, she says that she quite openly puts a lot of ugly things on the page, and wants that to be more common so people don't shy away from these things as much, which I think is true. And the other part of the memoir is really focused on her as a mother and how she feels about her own children, and lots of things that have happened there. So there's lots of grief in this memoir, there's lots of harrowing things that happened to her. So yeah, I don't think I got as much as I could out of this. I think I need to reread it. I definitely think it's worth a read, and I would recommend it, but not if you only enjoy traditional memoirs, because this just isn't that. So there's that one. And then the last one I have, I feel like I have a bit of dust there. The last one I have is The Terrible. Now I've tried to look up how to say this author's name, and I think it's Yezra Daily Ward. I've probably said that wrong. So this author, her parents were from Jamaica, but they moved to the northeast of England, where she grew up. Now this again is very experimental. Each chapter, I guess, is only a page or two long. This author is a poet, and this is her first book, I think, that's come out that isn't poetry, and you can tell she's a poet. So again, this is quite experimental, but it is told chronologically. So the book starts with her as a young girl and her relationship with her mother, her brother and her grandparents. And there's lots of turmoil there. Her mother can't really cope with the children. She goes through quite a few boyfriends that the children don't really get on with, and they're regularly sent off to live with their grandparents. And then it's about sort of a heartbreak that happens to her and her family, and then when she decides to move out with a much older man, and eventually gets involved with lots of drink and drugs, and sort of also gets involved with lots of things that she later isn't proud of, like the sex trade, and yeah, just involved with people that she's not really, it's not healthy to be around in particular. Now, again, I prefer the first half, when she's a child. I think it's beautifully written. This is so easy to read. You could probably get through this in one sitting. Compared to Heartberries, whilst they're both very stylistic, I found this one, sometimes with Heartberries I felt like I didn't know enough to understand everything. This one isn't like that. I think this one's quite easy to understand and to follow. So what I found with this one, whilst I really enjoyed it, I just found that the second half, for me, was nowhere near as good as the first half. And also I think the second half became, this sounds awful because it's someone's own life, but became slightly repetitive. So we'd have chapter after chapter of her taking a lot of drugs, drinking a lot of alcohol, losing touch with people who were, you know, who she should have stayed in touch with, feeling guilty about it, and then repeat. And I felt that whereas in the first half she really gave you the emotions of what was happening to her, in the second half it lost that, which I understand, because the reason she was taking all these drugs and drinking all this drink was to block out all these emotions. But I guess as the reader it just reads as a long litany of all this stuff that's happened with no real connection to any of that. So I enjoyed this. I think it's worth a read, but for me I much preferred the first half of this book. So yeah, there's that one. Okay, now on to the novels. So the first one I want to talk about is A Place for Us by Fatima Farheen Mirza. Now I was kindly sent this one for review and decided to pick it up because I love a good family drama, and I'd heard amazing things about this one. So this is about an Indian Muslim family who live in California. And the novel starts with one of the sisters getting married, and her estranged brother has been invited and she's desperately hoping that he turns up. You don't know why he's estranged, you have no idea where he's been or how long it's been, and that's the opening chapter, and it really gripped me. I felt that it was really well written. I instantly cared about all of the characters and I wanted to know their history. And then the book goes back and you start to find out all the pieces of this narrative as to what happened before. So this book is written, I think, in third person perspective throughout, I'm pretty sure, and it jumps between several of the characters. So we get the parents' perspectives, and we get the daughter's perspective who's getting married, and then the estranged son's perspective. And one of the daughter's perspectives you never really get, which is something I didn't really understand. I felt it was just odd to only miss one family member out of the perspective, but yeah, there's that. So the novel is told, it isn't told chronologically, so what happens is as you follow one character's viewpoint, and you follow their chronology, and then you go to the next chapter and it's another character and you go to their chronology. So for example, the mother starts telling you the story from the birth of her son. So her story is around his much younger years, whereas the son himself might start telling his story when he's around 8. And so his narrative goes into later years and it all sort of pulls together. And what this means is that you do see some moments from 2 or 3 perspectives, and so you, from one person's perspective who's having something done to them, you think, why did that person do that? It's completely wrong and stupid. And then you see it from their perspective and you understand why they thought that was the right thing to do at the time. So I enjoyed this. I think it's a really great debut novel. I think the characters were strong, and I enjoyed the narrative. I found it an easy read. What I will say is that I felt this could have been shorter. So it's around 380 pages, and I just felt that there wasn't enough within this book in terms of storyline or character development to warrant that length. I think all the characters are in exactly the same situation at the end as they were at the start. It's just that you understand more about them. So this is sort of an insight into this family, but you can, it's one of those books where it doesn't matter that it's predictable, but I guess I didn't think it would be as predictable as it is. And I also found myself thinking that if people had just had a few more honest conversations that didn't seem like they were all that crazy, those conversations could have happened. A lot of things could have been solved. So I enjoyed this. I think it's a really strong debut. I'll certainly read her next books, and I see why lots of people think it's really great. I just think that it wasn't quite excellent. So yeah, there's that one. So the next book I'm going to talk about is The Western Wind by Samantha Harvey. So this is a historical fiction novel that's set in a small village in rural England called Oakham in 1491. So I think this is probably the sort of earliest historical fiction book I've ever read about. So this is quite an interesting book. This is told over the course of 4 days, but it's told backwards. It's told from the perspective of a local priest as a body is discovered in their small river, and he is woken out of his bed in the middle of the night to come and see this body basically and to recover it. And across these 4 days a dean is sent to investigate what's happened to this body, whether it was suicide or murder or an accident, and he is also sort of sent there to point the blame at somebody, and our local priest is trying to avoid that blame being pointed at anyone else in his village, but also at him. Now, it's really interesting with the book being told backwards, because actually it makes a story that I guess told in order would still be an interesting story. It makes it much more interesting because of what you have to piece together, and it also means that it allows Father John Reeve to be really unreliable and to hide things from you, and things that don't seem all that important in day 4, which is your first chapter, to be revealed as very important in day 1, which is your last chapter. So this isn't written in the language of 1491, and I listened to Samantha Harvey on, I think it was the Vintage podcast, where she spoke about her choice in not doing that, and she said that she avoided that for 2 reasons. One, because it would have been difficult to do. She's not a historian, she generally writes contemporary novels, and she just felt like she wouldn't do it justice. And 2, because she felt, more importantly, that in 1491 the people of the time wouldn't have felt that the way they spoke was dated, because of course it wouldn't have been, it would have been contemporary. So she felt that as the reader, she wanted you to feel the same, that the language was contemporary and you didn't feel separate from it. She wanted you to be pulled in to the lives of the people of Oakham, which I understood. So this does feel like a historical novel. I really can't comment on how well this does 1491 justice. I did look at lots of people's reviews on Goodreads and saw a few reviews from people who were a lot more well versed in the time period, but pointed out some historical inaccuracies, but I can't really comment to that. So quite an important part of this novel is that Father John Reeve has suffered lessening people coming to the church service, and he has realised that a reason for this is because people don't want to come and confess to their small town priest because everyone knows one another, and so they're actually going out to a local crossroads and they're paying a travelling man to give their confession to him, which obviously means that the church is losing money. So Father John Reeve has heard about the confession box in Italy, and he has asked if he can have a confession box in his church, and he's made a sort of really slapdash confession box. And lots of the story takes place in the confession box, because it's people coming to confession and saying, I think I might know this about the missing body and all this sort of thing. So on the one hand, I think this is a great novel. It's quite beautifully written. I could see the village, I remember the characters, and I read this a couple of months ago. But on the other hand, I guess I just wanted more from it, something more. I don't know, I just didn't care quite enough about all the characters. And it's one of those novels that once I got to the end, it makes you want to go back to the first chapter again, of course, because of the way it's told. And some of the language in the first chapter makes much more sense once you read the last one, which I found enjoyable. But I don't know what it was about this. I think it's a good book. And I'd be interested to look into what her other books are about. But I guess it just wasn't as great as I hoped it would be. So I'd be really intrigued if anyone else has read this to hear what they thought. I badly read this with Simon. I mean, he really, really loved it, and I could completely see why, but for whatever reason, I just enjoyed this. And to be honest, whilst I was reading it, it was a book that I'd have to sort of remind myself to pick back up. I wasn't desperate to get to the next chapter, so yeah, a good book, but not a great one for me. And then lastly, we have my favourite of the 3 novels, and that is The Hoarder by Jess Kidd. Now, I haven't read any of Jess Kidd's other novels, but definitely want to go and read them all because they all sound really interesting. This is quite a bizarre little book to describe, so I'll do my best. So this is about a lady called Maud Drennan, who is sent to look after a man called Carful Flood. So she works for a company that send caregivers into elderly people's homes to sort of cook their dinner and keep their house clean. And there's this old man called Carful Flood who owns a really big old house in quite a large area of land, and he has sort of scared all these other people off because he is quite aggressive and quite bizarre, and he is a hoarder, so his house is quite dangerous to go in because there's stacks and stacks of things everywhere. But Maud is sent to look after him and to try and clear some space in his house and to make him more safe. And here's where it gets odd. Maud sees saints. So as I guess in some novels people see ghosts that talk to them, Maud sees saints. So she knows about a lot of saints and they come and talk to her regularly, but for whatever reason they don't follow her into Carful Flood's house. They follow her everywhere else, but they won't follow her into this house. So at the heart of this book there's a mystery and Maud starts to believe that there may be a historical murder that went on that Carful is involved in, and so she starts to sneak into parts of the house that she shouldn't do to find out more. So this is a sort of darkly comic book. Now I don't usually lean towards books that have any comedy in them just because I don't know what it is. I guess I have a very particular sense of humour that I don't find translates well to the page. I don't know, but I really enjoyed this. I thought it was really funny. There's quite a lot of foul language that always helps with me, and yeah, I just really liked Maud, I really liked Carful, I really liked all the sort of secondary characters, and I really enjoyed this book. It is odd, but it's good odd. It's a bit of a change. It's quite different to anything else I've ever read, and I just really like the characters. It has that sort of cosy working class drama to it whilst also being a bit supernatural, a bit funny, a bit dark. And I guess the only negative thing I can say about this is there's a memory that keeps surfacing in Maud which makes you sort of connect as to why she sees these saints. And as you get more and more through the book the memory becomes more distinct and you start to understand more as Maud begins to understand more about what happened in her past. And I just think that storyline was a bit unnecessary. I don't feel like it really came to fruition. I feel like if it was going to be put in there, then there needed to be more finality to it, and instead I felt that it was just this addition that never really went anywhere. So that's pretty much the only criticism I can say about this book. I really enjoyed it and will 100% read Jess Kidd's other books. I think she might have 2 other books, so yeah, I need to look into them and pick them up. So be intrigued to hear if you've read this one or any of her other books because yeah, as I said, really enjoyed it. So those are the 6 books I've recently hauled, read and now reviewed. Let me know if you've read them or if you have anything else to recommend. I'd love to hear, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.